Since the fall of Roe v. Wade, the battle over abortion hasn't just played out in state legislatures or courts. It's spilled into the streets and even into our justice system. Across the country, pregnancy centers have been vandalized, firebombed, and threatened. Sidewalk counselors and peaceful pro-life protesters have faced federal prosecution under the FACE Act, a law that's been twisted into a weapon against free speech. And yet, while those who pray or speak outside abortion facilities are hit with federal charges, violent attackers who brutally assault pro-lifers often walk free. It's a double standard that raises urgent questions about justice, free expression, and the role of government in policing dissent. Today, we're digging into this alarming reality with investigative journalist Leif of the Daily Wire, who has reported extensively on both the physical violence against pro-lifers and the Biden DOJ's prosecutions of peaceful activists. His reporting lays bare what's really happening in the post-Roe era, a campaign of violence and lawfare against Americans who refuse to stay silent. Joining him is Janet Durig, former director of a pregnancy center on Capitol Hill that was targeted by vandals and activists. Janet provides firsthand insight into the real-world impact of this violence, showing how pro-life centers are under attack while still serving vulnerable women and families in their communities. This is Exposed, Abortion in America, Season 4, Post-Roe, The Next Battle. And you're listening to Episode 7, Under Attack, How Pro-Lifers Became a Target in Post-Roe America. Leif, thanks for coming on and joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So, Leif, I want to get right into it. You recently reported on a 28-year-old Baltimore man by the name of Patrick Brice, his brutal attack on two elderly pro-life advocates in Baltimore, and how he effectively dodged prison time for the most part. Can you walk us through what happened there with that case? And how the legal system responded?
Sure. Now, the whole thing started about 2 years ago. There's a 73-year-old man named Mark Crosby, and very, very devout Catholic, very, very pro-life. And there's a Planned Parenthood in Baltimore that he and his friend Dick Schaefer, who was 84, that they would routinely go and engage in sidewalk counseling and just talk to people about the reality of abortion. Now, about 2 years ago, they were doing this, and they do this almost every day. A man named Patrick Brice, as you mentioned earlier, he came up to them, and he started an argument with Dick Schaefer, who's 84. And at one point, he got violent, and he tackled Schaefer into a potted plant, and Crosby was standing a little farther away, and he ran up to see what was happening, and Brice just punches him in the face, throws him on the ground, and then walks away and kicks him in the head. And now, after that, which was all caught on security footage, Brice was not apprehended for over a year.
Whoa.
So even though they had footage and Brice lived within a couple blocks of the Planned Parenthood, so he was free for a year, and then they finally arrested and charged him about a year later. The police did not tell Crosby that they had arrested him, that they had made an arrest, which is pretty interesting, and something that Crosby told me he was very upset about, because his attacker was walking around free for a year, and then they arrest him, and he doesn't get an update until his lawyers find out about it. But anyway, so he's arrested a year later. Now, about another year later, the case goes to trial. The jury, he's charged with first-degree assault and second-degree assault, and a jury acquits him of the more serious first-degree assault charge. But they do find him guilty of the second-degree assault and reckless endangerment charges. But Crosby and his legal team want Brice found guilty of first-degree assault because it was such a brutal attack, and you can watch it on YouTube. you can see him being kicked in the head and punched in the face. And he got up. He was all bloodied, blood running down his shirt.
The visuals of, I think, Crosby's face are some of the worst that I've seen as far as just blood dripping down his face. I mean, you can tell just from the photos how horrific the attack was.
And he was left with bruises and permanent eye damage under really sunny conditions. He now has a condition where he has to cover up one of his eyes because of some of the damage caused during the attack. And obviously, this is a 27-year-old man attacking a 74-year-old man and an 84-year-old man.
Wow.
So, but they get retried. It goes to a judge. They have a second chance to go to trial for first-degree assault, and the judge just finds him not guilty of first-degree assault. So that kind of limits the penalties that the prosecutors can ask for Bryce. And then he was just sentenced earlier this month, and I went to the sentencing, and the judge basically gave him a slap on the wrist, and they sentenced him to a year of home detention. Now, that sounds kind of bad if you think about it, but he still gets to go to work. He can still go grocery shopping. He just can't go on vacation for a year. But so he gets a year of home detention. He can still maintain a job. No financial penalty. The judge didn't even give him a rebuke for the violence that he exhibited during the attack. So he basically walked free from the whole incident.
And I think the thing that I want our listeners to take away from this is this type of violence is indicative of what we are seeing. Not that it never happened prior to the removal of Roe, but that there has most certainly been a documented uptick in violence against pregnancy centers and pro-lifers. So, Leif, you cover a lot of different stories. You don't just cover this particular topic, but a lot of hard-hitting stories too that you've written. But what was it about these types of stories, the prosecutions, the violence that drew you in, and why do you feel that these are important stories to investigate and bring to light?
Well, first I wanted to mention that, like you said, these pregnancy centers have been attacked a lot after the overturn of Roe v. Wade. And there's a good organization called Catholic Vote, which tracks a lot of these attacks. And they've tracked there's been close to 100 acts of vandalism or violence targeting firebombings, targeting pro-life crisis pregnancy centers. And there have been very few charges brought in those cases. A lot of them just have no arrests, no one. So there hasn't really been a lot of justice in a lot of those cases, and that's one of the things that has kind of motivated me in these cases, because on the one hand, you have all these attacks on pro-life people, pro-life organizations that want to help women and save babies, and then on the other hand, you have these pro-abortion people, attacking peaceful sidewalk counselors and then getting away with no real penalty. And at the same time, for a couple years after Roe, you had the Biden administration really using the FACE Act, which is the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, which is supposed to protect entrance into either abortion facilities or crisis pregnancy centers. But they really weaponized that act to go after peaceful pro-life protesters all around the country and throw the book at them and try to get these people thrown in jail. And in some cases, they really did get some of these people pretty lengthy prison sentences.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that, because in your experience in reporting, I mean, it seems pretty clear to me, but is it also clear to you that it really was the Biden DOJ that abused the FACE Act? And you really see it come to light? Because originally, the original intent, so they say, of the FACE Act was to be equally applied to both the abortion center and the pregnancy center. But in application, that's not at all the case that we saw, and even less so with the Biden DOJ. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. I'll also note that Representative Chip Roy, who's been great on this whole issue as well, he got data from the Justice Department that found that in the whole history of FACE, actually, well over 90% of all prosecutions brought by the federal government are against pro-life people.
Wow.
And some of those prosecutions are probably acts of violence that no pro-lifer would support, but a good chunk of them are against peaceful people who are just protesting abortion.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we've seen as well. So that kind of brings me back to the entire concept of free speech. So you've seen a lot over the last few years. What would be, thinking of broader implications, what are warning signs that you see for free speech advocates, especially pro-life advocates? And could these patterns of enforcement escalate or even spread to other forms of religious or political expression? Can you give us your take on that?
Sure. Yeah, I would be worried about, for the moment, FACE Act, under the Trump administration, FACE Act is only going to be prosecuted in cases of extreme violence or other extreme circumstances, extreme vandalism like arson or violence. Under Biden, it was used for people who were maybe sitting in front of doors or holding signs, or in some cases, people would go into facilities, but they were peaceful and no violence was committed. No one was targeted. But there's definitely a concern that as long as the FACE Act remains the law, that it can be weaponized against pro-life people, like the Biden administration did. And there's also Trump pardoned about 24 of these peaceful pro-life protesters when he got into office. His first week in office, he pardoned them. And there may be a future Democratic administration may want to go back and reapply the law in a similar way that Biden did, because Biden actually introduced he paired the FACE Act with a conspiracy against rights charge, which was a law from the 1870s meant to crack down on the KKK. And that allowed FACE Act the people facing the FACE Act charges to face a lot longer jail sentences. You could get over 10 years in prison if you're convicted of FACE paired with conspiracy against rights. And so you had people like 89-year-old Eva Edel, who was a communist concentration camp survivor in Yugoslavia in the 1940s. She came over, immigrated to America, became involved in the pro-life movement. She was facing 10 years in prison just for sitting in front of a abortion facility door. And now if they're willing to throw the book at a communist concentration camp survivor, I mean, that definitely raises concerns about what they're willing to do to other people.
Oh, that's such a great point, because I mean, that's effectively a death sentence in federal prison for these elderly citizens that, a sizable amount of the people that they, attacked with the FACE Act, they were elderly.
Yeah, there was another woman named Paula Harlow, and I have she was sentenced to quite a lengthy time in prison as well. So she was 74, and she got 2 years in prison. Paulette Harlow, and that's quite a lengthy time when you're in your 70s. 2 years is a lot.
Yeah, I just want to paint this picture for everybody, which is you've got the Biden DOJ applying the fullest extent that they can get on these sentences against pro-lifers who are outside, many of them outside, either singing praise and worship songs, praying, standing there. And this is just a really, really destructive way to go about weaponizing our government against people who you disagree with. So, Leif, in your in your summation, how easy would it be for a future administration that's, say, Democrat or pro-abortion minded to do this again?
It'd be very easy because the law hasn't changed. Only the application of the law has changed under the new administration, which is probably very problematic for the law itself. If how it is applied depends on who's in power, that's not a good law.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is very true.
And Congress, interestingly enough, there has been some congressional action on repealing the FACE Act. The House Judiciary Committee voted earlier this year to repeal the FACE Act, and which is a lot of progress, because I think 10 years ago no one would even consider repealing it. But
yeah.
I think unfortunately, due to the Biden administration's aggressive prosecution of it, that's kind of opened the eyes to a lot of people. But still, that would have an uphill battle in the Senate. But I think Republicans are making some progress on the legislative front.
Yeah, that is my question to you too, as a follow-up. Like, how significant is that effort from what you're seeing, and can removing the FACE Act restore some balance and protect free speech on the sidewalk, in your opinion?
Yes, I think so. And then it would be on the cases where someone maybe goes into a building and you are technically trespassing, then that could be prosecuted on the local level. And a lot of these cases don't need to be prosecuted by the federal government. And so the local authorities can often handle these cases without needing to spend taxpayer dollars tracking down 89-year-old pro-life activists. Or a lot of these people have big families. In one example, there's a man named Paul Vaughn who lives out in Centerville, Tennessee, and it's a very rural area, and he was charged over a sit-in outside a abortion facility in Mount Juliet, Tennessee, and the FBI conducted a pre-dawn or an early morning raid of his home, and they were armed. They took him away in a truck as his family was getting ready for school. And there's really no need for the FBI to show up armed, because he says he would have turned himself in, and he would have been happy to just show up and speak to investigators. But instead, the FBI sent out an armed force to his home, and he had young children around.
Yeah, I mean, that's really frightening to think of the prospect of that happening just because you were standing outside of an abortion center. You know, this comes to mind. I remember a few months ago, Vice President J.D. Vance speaking to leaders in Europe. Now, granted, it's a different country that he was talking about, but there is the fear that, if we go further, could we get to that point? He had mentioned a situation in the UK in which there was an individual who was prosecuted by their government for a thought crime, essentially, for praying outside of an abortion center. I mean, that's terrifying, but I mean, could we be that far off if we keep going down this road?
No, in some cases we came pretty close to it. Thankfully, we have the First Amendment here in America, so that provides a lot of protection that a lot of the European countries don't have. But a lot of times, sometimes the application of the law does seem to infringe upon the First Amendment. And in fact, the Thomas More Society, which has defended many of the FACE Act defendants, is actually looking to have a judge overturn FACE Act on the basis of the First Amendment, because pointing to the fact that 90% of cases have been prosecuted against pro-lifers, and it's supposed to be a neutral law, that kind of indicates that it is a politically motivated law as opposed to a neutral law.
Yeah, I think it's really important to punctuate that point, Leif, because oftentimes we'll hear from people, well, you don't want to get rid of the FACE Act because what if something happens at pregnancy centers? And I think that response that you just gave is exactly the one I would say in retort, which is it's not really being applied to protect pregnancy centers against violence and firebombing. If I remember correctly, there was a Senate hearing, and I can't remember which senator, but they were asking the FBI director under Biden at the time about how many people they have apprehended that have conducted violence against pregnancy centers. And he just said something so bizarre to me, which was, well, we haven't really been able to apprehend that many. They conduct these acts of violence in the dark. And to me, that was just kind of a slap in the face of, you must not really be trying, Yeah,
I remember that exchange. I think that was Mike Lee talking to Merrick Garland, and basically he said, oh, well, the pro-life people are protesting during the day, so it's easy to arrest them, and the bad stuff happening at pregnancy centers happens at night, so that's tougher to track down, which is kind of discouraging when you're supposed to be in charge of enforcing the law in this country.
Yeah, add that to the list of things I would never think I would hear as limitations to how our government can apply the law. So I guess moving forward, just to kind of put all of this together for our listeners, for those who care about either side, really, of this debate or about civil liberties, but especially to those, of course, who are pro-life and feel really nervous about getting out there and praying in abortion centers or facilities, what should we all be paying attention to next? And how can people really steward their rights in the face of this political weaponization that we've seen?
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is that if people want to see the FACE Act removed, they should continue to speak with their lawmakers about it and continue to encourage them to pursue that because it is a rare opportunity with Republicans having all three branches of government at the federal level at the moment to maybe take advantage of that and make some forward progress there, because that will really if FACE is repealed, that will really provide a lot of protection for those people, and also I guess it comes down to the level of risk each person is willing to tolerate, but there still are ways that you can be a sidewalk counselor or protest abortion within your constitutional rights that you shouldn't have to worry about. So
yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming on here. We definitely will be reading your continued reporting, and we'll be following closely as you continue to cover all of these important issues, but particularly on the FACE Act and political weaponization and violence against pro-lifers. So thank you for the reporting you've already done, and look forward to reading more.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Janet Durig is my name, and I'm the exiting executive director, and now am the executive director emeritus at the Capitol Hill Pregnancy Center.
In this entire season of this podcast, we're looking at what's different now post removal of Roe, and how that compares to before. And one of the things that I think must be said in this series is the uptick in violence against pro-lifers and pregnancy centers. Not that there wasn't some that happened before, but clearly by the numbers, by what's happening on the ground, there is an uptick. So can you kind of share with our audience, why are you the perfect person, sadly and tragically, to speak on this?
Well, I'm one of the perfect persons, maybe not the perfect, but one of the perfect, because just several days before the Dobbs decision actually came out, and the suspicion was the result was going to be the result that did happen, we were vandalized at the Capitol Hill Pregnancy Center. It was a Friday morning, very early. A neighbor called and said, "You need to get in here." and explained what happened. And when I arrived, I looked at a gallon of red paint that had been thrown on our front door, I assume representing blood, but we're not the ones who shed blood. And written on our walls was graffiti, "Jane says revenge." And it may not sound like much, but the reality is it showed the hatred of people who don't like faith-based pregnancy centers. And I guess what I don't understand is when they think about disliking us or hating us, they're really choosing to hate people, women and girls who choose to keep their babies, because that's what we do. We help people who choose to keep their babies. And it just comes across to me, and has for a very long time, that this hatred is against the babies themselves. And I don't understand that. When you move forward to the banquet that we had the following year, and we had 8 young men and women sign up for our banquet who we thought were coming from St. Dominic's Church, which St. Dominic's priest and members of their church had never heard of them. They infiltrated our banquet, and they, began yelling and screaming profanities to me when I was at the podium, and it was one interruption after the other, screaming and yelling. We got word from some legal sources that we needed to hire the police from Arlington to cover our banquet because there were threats on the internet toward the pregnancy center and our banquet. And that did happen. We also had hired, when we had the vandalism, we had hired a security company to guard our building at night. And so we hired that same security company to join the police that night, which turned out to be very valuable. And each one of these young men and women except the last one running out the door saying she couldn't do this anymore, they just kept interrupting and yelling profanities. And it was very disheartening, truthfully. But at the same time, I pointed out to the audience when the final person had been dragged out of the room, so to speak, I looked at 2 tables in the back of our banquet, and I noticed that there was a table with Students for Life, and the Knights of Columbus were represented from Georgetown University students, and some also Knights of Columbus group that were sitting there and were attending our banquet, pro-life coming from Catholic University. So, that offset, I pointed out, to offset the young people in that age bracket, there are wonderful ones who understand what we do and support us, and I pointed them out.
And Janet, at your banquet, at these, annual banquets that pregnancy centers have, a big part of that is highlighting the women that are helped and the work that you're doing. I imagine you probably had some women there who were sharing their personal testimonies. Is that right?
Absolutely, and that frightened them. And it's frightening for our clients to begin with, to get up and tell their story and be willing to do it, and then to add that to the mix was a horrible experience for that person. And the reality is, again, all we do is help people. Why do they do this? Why did they beat up that man in Baltimore? Why did a man and his son a little boy get arrested and sued and so on several years ago?
Well, let's kind of roll back then, because I want people to know the services that y'all provide, because they're indicative of so many services around the country that hundreds of pregnancy centers provide. So how's your center served the community since 1985?
Well, we've served the community first and foremost by offering at no cost everything we do. And we offer free pregnancy testing and options education. And when I say options education, I'm obviously talking about educating them about what would your life look like if you kept your baby? What do you think abortion is? But any question we ask someone, we do not force our viewpoint on anyone. We simply educate them to the level they want to be educated. But most women and most even teenage girls will, once they find they have a support system, they often change their mind and keep their baby. So then what happens? They need help. They need material support. They need a bed for the baby. They need a pack and play that can serve as a bed for the first year of a baby's life in Washington, D.C. They need a car seat, and we're connected with the motor vehicle department, and people will give us car seats, and we're able to help with that. And then and baby clothes and emergency supplies of diapers. We can't do it all, but we can be there as a strong support. And we offer parenting classes, we offer childbirth classes, and then we just offer them counseling as well. Once they have their baby, they can come once a month to continually get this supply that they need.
And Janet, you all are serving multiple populations, right? Diverse populations. Is it correct that you also have English and Spanish?
Absolutely, we do. We do. We're so grateful for anyone who can speak Spanish right now to join us as a volunteer or on staff. That's just been a major, major help.
Yeah, so this is all kinds of different people in our nation's capital seeking help with their pregnancy, and they're walking through your doors. What are some of the things that encourage you that you've heard from the women and families that have come through your doors?
Well, first of all, their thank yous and their gratefulness, and many of them show that just with a hug or the words themselves. But they do show how grateful they are. They don't act any differently than grateful. But then there's things like a teenage girl being, this was a few years ago, with Jamie, our new executive director, and this young woman was a junior in high school, left thinking she was going to abort her baby, called Jamie back a couple days later and said, I've decided to keep my baby. How can you help me? And she came back in, and we walked with her, Jamie taking the lead through her pregnancy. Her mother came on board and helped her because her mother had encouraged the abortion, but her mother came on board and helped her. And 2 years later, Jamie went to her graduation from high school. Then she's in the middle of college at the University of DC with a darling daughter, and she's so happy she kept her child. That's just one of hundreds, if not thousands, of stories in the 22 years I've been there that I could tell.
Wow. So let's get back then to the act of vandalism. This was the first time in over 2 decades of service for y'all that something like this happened, right? Is that correct?
It's never happened, and this is our 40th year in existence. It's never happened before that I'm aware of. I've been there 22 and a half years.
Wow.
And in addition to that, though, I mean, it hasn't been very long ago that a neighbor came over and gave me and sent a picture of a person she photographed late at night, photographing we have very large windows for our counts in our reception area. And he was photographing the windows at close to midnight. And then I have other pictures, and I have his picture. I have a picture when the guards were there after the vandalism. We have pictures of a young man, probably looked like he might be 22 or 23, with a mask on, photographing our windows, and the guard got out of the car and he ran. But we don't, we have no way of knowing how many other people are doing something like that, and why are they doing it? What are they planning? So we don't live in fear, but we live with the thought that we don't know when something might happen, and we hope it never does.
Janet, what are the people who are committing these criminal acts and these acts of violence? What are they not understanding about the women that you're helping?
They don't understand that if a woman leaves our center and she's abortion minded and or abortion vulnerable, if she's either one of those, because you're one of either of those, and if she leaves and she goes through with that abortion, we have never shamed her, we have never intimidated her. What we have said to her is that if you do go, if she hasn't made up her mind to keep her baby before she leaves us, we say, if you go through with your abortion and you have any ill feelings, if you have any emotional feelings, even years down the road or right after you have the experience, you can come back here and we'll help you through a healing process. They don't understand that we don't judge them. We do believe in life, but we will not judge her for making that choice.
Do you also think that it's hard for them to wrap their minds around women with unplanned pregnancies who are coming to you guys getting substantial help, whether that's emotional, financial, or both?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that they understand. Well, it goes back to they simply don't understand what pregnancy centers like ours actually do. It may not sound like a big thing to an outsider, but A mother coming for material support once a month doesn't often just have one baby. Sometimes she has other children. And people were donating storybooks to us. And we finally got, they came in bags of baby clothes. And so we finally just starting setting them out in a bookcase. And then we did use storybook drives, and we probably need to do one soon. And so as we do that, what happens is the older children sit on the floor while their mother's waiting for her supplies, and they're allowed to take it's not like you can take 3, you can take 1, you can take 5. They can take as many as they want, and they grin from ear to ear when they can take these books. And we also teach and encourage our mothers how important to read to the baby. And so we've developed quite a storybook center in a corner of our reception room. And one little boy, he was 8 years old, came over to me one day and showed me the books he had taken, and there were 5 of them. And I said, "You could have a couple more. Do you want to go look?" And he said, "Yes." And when he came back with 2 or 3 more books, he looked at me and said, "I've never owned a book before." Now, wow. Yeah, I mean, it warms your heart to be able to do something as simple as a storybook.
Back on the escalation because of the hostility, what would help your center to continue its mission safely and effectively? I mean, what do y'all need in this new moment? What are you hoping for? And I think you've listed a few, but how have you had to adjust?
We've had to adjust by being more aware of our surroundings when we come and go to the building. We've adjusted by spending $160,000 on security systems, on glass breakage and alarm systems, and actually, the period of time that we have security guards, we've had to do anything you can think of. Cameras, we've placed cameras. Anybody who's coming up to photograph us, anybody who's would do anything to harm the building, now they're going to be photographed at least. And one other thing I do want to mention is how wonderful the DC police were at that time and continue to be. Actually, they increased their drive-bys during that time by a large percentage, and they would drop by periodically to make sure we felt safe. And at one point they put QR codes in our windows, and when they came to do that, I said, "What is it for?" And he said, the policeman that hung them, he said, this will monitor at headquarters how many times we're coming past your building. He said, we want to make sure we keep you safe.
That's a lot of good action to keep you guys safe.
Yes. So it is what it is, and we continue to keep doing what we do as best as we can.
So you're sadly not the only one that has experienced this. I mean, from the tracker that I've seen, it's over 100 different pregnancy centers since the removal of Roe that have felt, either this vandalism, violence, combination of both acutely. So what would you say to other pregnancy centers who are fearful or just experiencing this?
Well, I'd just say keep the faith, number one, and know that you're doing good work, and keep doing what you're doing. And if you're police, my guess is from the pregnancy centers I'm familiar with that were firebombed and in situations like that, the police in their neighborhoods and in their section of the country have escalated care as well. I hope so. And I know that many of them, I don't know all of the ones that were harmed, but I know some other directors in those locations. They too upgraded, sound alarms, glass breakage sound alarms, and so on, smoke alarms, which we already had those, and maybe cameras as well. So we've all had to go to a huge expense.
And Janet, something I just thought about, you can speak to this from your experience because you have a pregnancy center in a deeply, deeply pro-abortion area.
Yes.
What would you say to others who say, I've talked to one who was in New Jersey or New York or California. What's your advice to them?
My advice is to keep your doors open. Just keep being there for those who need it.
Well, Janet, Thank you for coming on. I know it's not the easiest topic to talk about, given just how terrible the experience was with that act of vandalism, but I applaud your courage to speak, and I really hope that for all the pregnancy centers listening, that you take Janet's advice and that you continue to just keep your door open, especially if you're in those very pro-abortion regions, because women and their families, they need you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And our thanks, go out to our two national associations, Heartbeat International and CareNet. They're very supportive to all the pregnancy centers that are their members.
Well, that's great. Janet, thank you so much. As we wrap up today's episode, the reality is clear. The post-Roe era is not just a legal battleground. It's a front line where pro-life advocates, volunteers, and pregnancy centers are facing real threats, both physical and political. Leif's reporting has shown us the stark disparities in how violent attacks are treated versus peaceful activism, while Janet's firsthand account reminds us that behind every headline are real people working tirelessly to serve women and protect life. The takeaway is both sobering and inspiring. The fight for life is ongoing, but it's carried forward by courageous individuals and communities who refuse to be silenced. That's why we must stay informed, stay engaged, and remember, supporting life is not just a movement, it's a commitment to protecting the most vulnerable among us. Next time, we'll continue exploring the ways life-affirming organizations are making a tangible difference in post-Roe America, and how these stories offer hope for the future. That's next time on Exposed, Abortion in America, Season 4, Post-Roe, The Next Battle. Until then, keep standing, keep speaking, and keep fighting for life.